And I am now starting to record this morning's engaging presentation. We are so excited about this. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mario A.J. Bennekin Black History Symposium 2025. Our theme is Echoes of Resilience, Black Artistry, History, and Identity. And we are so excited to be presenting Ms. Angela Tharpe on this morning as our presenter and our resident scholar. It is a privilege to have her this morning, and I'm sure that you want to know a little bit more about her. So let me share some information. Ms. Angela Tharpe earned her Bachelor's of Arts in English with a concentration in professional writing from Baylor University and her Master's in Fine Arts and Creative Writing Fiction from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Currently a PhD candidate in English at Emory University. Her research explores representations of restlessness in Black American culture as a lens for understanding broader themes of Black identity and representation. Her academic interests include Black studies, popular culture, and inclusive pedagogy. Angela teaches English composition at Perimeter College's Clarkston campus. So let us all give a virtual good morning and round of applause for our scholar of the hour, Ms. Angela Tharpe. And I am, for those of you who don't know who I am Dr. Ursula Thomas, the Associate Chair of Cultural and Behavioral Sciences online in Clarkston campus. I'm also a professor of education. So I am excited to be here to learn from a fellow scholar on this morning. A little bit of housekeeping. Of course, this presentation is being recorded. We will have contact information towards the end of the presentation for Ms. Tharpe, and she will provide additional contact information or additional references or resources in the event that you require this. Please make sure that you put all of your questions in the chat. And please make sure that your microphone is muted until it is time to entertain questions towards the end. Some people may want to come off of mute to ask their questions of our resident scholar towards the end of the presentation. We will have the last 20 to 15 minutes reserved for questions, reflection, responses, and a little bit from the Amen corner, I'm quite sure. And so now we're going to turn this presentation over to Angela Tharpe. And once again, please make sure that you check all of your microphone speakers and you put your questions in the chat. There are a couple of us that will be monitoring that chat as well. And now I will turn it over to our scholar of the hour, Ms. Angela Tharpe.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's here. I'm still getting used to WebEx, so I appreciate you guys being here, and I'm excited to talk to you today. So let's jump in. Okay, let's see. We'll close out this. Wait, one moment. Let's see. Okay. Can you guys see the slides? Can you see me? Everything looking okay? Good. Oh, thank you for that thumbs up. Okay, I can see I see the thumbs up. That's nice. Okay, so we'll get started. My name is Angela Tharpe, and I will be presenting on the work of Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly with Aimé Césaire, who's a Caribbean poet. His surreal collection of poetry, notebook, or I guess a long poem, Notebook of a Return to a Native Land. And so the talk is called What's Your Perspective on That? Processes of Racial Reckoning in Aimé Césaire's Notebook of a Return to the Native Land and Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, So I just want to say a few quick notes before we begin. Thank you so much, Dr. Bennekin, Dr. Thomas, the other presenters, and to everyone else who helped organize the symposium. It's great to get to be a part of this. Yeah, I'm a limited term instructor this semester, and I was really excited to hear about the symposium and excited to get to contribute to it as well. To be a bit more specific in my presentation than I might be if I were summarizing or presenting, with bullet points, I'm going to read the essay that I wrote on Kendrick Lamar's and Aimé Césaire's intersecting themes in their work. I actually wrote this essay when I started my PhD, and now I'm going to graduate in May, so it's been a long time coming. But I was, I'm really interested in this and excited to share it with you all. And afterward, yeah, I'd love to answer any questions. I'm also happy to have a more informal conversation around Kendrick Lamar's work. I guess maybe that's the Aimé corner. I'm excited to hear about that. As well as how, you see his themes intersecting with other artists. Any of that is interesting to me. The essay will take about 35 minutes to read. I'm going to put the text on the slides as we go through in case it's helpful to read along. I'm kind of a audio-visual learner, and you might be, if you read subtitles when you watch TV, or it's helpful to read along, like that's helpful for me. So I wanted to put the text on the slides in case it's helpful for other people. And there's also a good amount of profanity in both of these artists' work. So I'll censor it in my speech unless it's directly relevant to the analysis. But in case profanity is uncomfortable for anyone, I will, I'll censor it in my speech and I'll leave it in the essay as it is for the sake of clarity. There's also some brief mentions of suicide, but nothing too graphic. Cool. So any questions before we jump in about that? We're feeling good. Maybe I can check. Okay, I think we're feeling good. Okay. So a quick note too before we start. I'm interested, these are sort of alternative covers for both of the texts. This isn't the official album cover for To Pimp a Butterfly, but I think it's interesting because it's this head, Kendrick Lamar's head, with people inside, people from the actual cover. And then Aimé Césaire's cover, this is one translation. They both have these heads that are somewhat surreal, and both of these artists use sort of like bend reality to kind of create more room for their expression. I find that an interesting tie, just sort of off the jump. And these two covers too, so this is the translation I'll be using for Aimé Césaire. We have this sort of surreal, like half man, half maybe unicorn animal up here, right? And then for Lamar, we've got these wings with people that he's maybe carrying inside them in this crown. And so again, we're sort of blending the real and the surreal here. Okay, so we're gonna get started with the essay. Everybody good? Okay, it's interesting not to see anyone, but I will trust that you were there. Okay. In Aimé Césaire's 1939 book of poetry, Notebook of a Return to the Native Land, he is returning to France, Martinique after living in Paris. In Kendrick Lamar's 2015 hip-hop album To Pimp a Butterfly, he is returning to Compton, California after traveling to perform his music. Both men have made it out of their hometowns, to use Kendrick Lamar's phrasing, and there's a sense of accomplishment in that because both of these towns are marked by death and dying. I'm interested in how these two Black men from different time periods, writing in different genres, follow similar steps of racial reckoning. In this essay, I will demonstrate how both Césaire's Notebook of a Return to the Native Land and Lamar's Pimp a Butterfly go through a process of racial reckoning that involves an inclusion of a discriminatory voice and an ironic affirmation of that voice, a genuine confession and a subsequent moment of shame, as well as an acknowledgement of the historical, a series of steps which ultimately allows them to accept their identity as Black men. So we'll walk through each of those steps in this talk. Here is Aimé Césaire, here's Kendrick Lamar, and we will move on from there. Okay. So the process of racial reckoning that Césaire and Lamar go through seems to be prompted by their return to a place that both gave them life and took so much life from around them. So much blood in my memory, Césaire writes a notebook. In my memory are lagoons. They are covered with death's heads. My memory is encircled with blood. My memory has a belt of corpses. And later, I hear coming up from the hole the enchained curses, the gasps of the dying, the noise of someone thrown in the sea. He describes suicide in his hometown and his own wish to die, sometimes referring to present death and sometimes to the historical. Césaire presents death in a way that is blurred, seeming to argue, as he later does explicitly, that the past allows one to transcend the present moment. Similarly, Lamar's hometown, Compton, was listed as the most deadly city in California in 1987, the year that Lamar was born. He saw his first murder victim at the age of 5 and had grown used to seeing the casualties of gang wars between Bloods and Crips until it was his friends lying still on hospital gurneys, shot down by gang members, one friend killed by a policeman. While Lamar's text is a hip-hop album and Césaire's is a book of poetry, arguably hip-hop is poetry, but alas, Both use similar tools to express themselves, including experimentation, sound, the voices of others, the historical, and storytelling. The texts are described in similar ways as well. Césaire's notebook is described as volcanic, often violent, obscure, and rhythmic, taking the reader on a journey through Césaire's intolerable reality. And Lamar's butterfly is described as dense, relentless, and discomfiting, and as demonstrating the degree to which a hip-hop artist can walk the line between being and non-being before deciding to live in spite of the constant threat of death. Both texts are political, addressing topics such as the state of Blackness in the contemporary, the aftermath of slavery's trauma, and the corruption of discriminatory authority. Césaire has said, if you want to understand my politics, read my poetry, and Lamar's song All Right became the unofficial anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2015. Though from different countries and time periods, writing in different genres, these two Black men follow a similar process of racial reckoning, which starts with an inclusion of a discriminatory voice, a voice that has sought to limit their humanity, if not extinguish it completely. So the first step of racial reckoning in these two texts is the inclusion of a discriminatory voice. However, before this voice is even made to speak, we see it on the landscape of these two texts. In both Césaire's notebook and Lamar's butterfly, authority figures are ever present. Césaire's notebook opens with a call for these figures to leave. He writes, "Beat it," I said to him. "I detest the flunkies of order and the cockchafers of hope. Beat it, evil Grigri, you bedbug of a petty monk," which I think is just bedbug of a petty monk. Such a great poetic line. He's definitely a poet. The long poem has just begun, and Césaire is already confronted with the presence trying to control him, but commanding it to leave allows Césaire to nourish the wind, unleash the monsters, and he arrives from the other side of disaster, a river of turtle doves. This initial moment seems to be emblematic of the process of racial reckoning to come, as facing those who have limited his existence and casting them off gives him more room to breathe. So this is Césaire saying, beat it, or not necessarily saying beat it here, but it seems like that's what he's saying. In Césaire's town, which he describes as sprawled flat, toppled from its common sense and mute, this authoritative presence is embodied not just in the policeman, but in a teacher in his classroom and the priest at catechism. See. As he remembers his childhood in a notebook, these are the authorities that were keeping him in place. At first, we merely see them, but then they are given a voice. In an interview with Charles H. Rowell, Césaire says, "No one questioned all that superiority of European civilization, its universal vocation. No one was ashamed of being a colony. Europe really had nothing on its conscience, and the colonized readily accepted this vision of the world. They had interiorized the colonizers' vision of themselves." In an interview with René Depeste, Césaire describes how this internalization of the colonizer's vision led to Black writers being proud when their racial identity wasn't detected in their writing. He tells Depeste of a Martinican pharmacist who was pleased when one of his poems won a prize, saying, "He told me that the judges hadn't even realized that his poems were written by a man of color," and then adding, "His poetry was so impersonal that it made him proud." Césaire describes writing like this as colorless and as both evidence of assimilation and, to him, a crushing condemnation. Instead of erasing his own racial identity in his work, Césaire highlights discrimination by encapsulating it in a voice. We see this inclusion of a discriminatory voice, both in the voice of the narrator, such as in the line, "And neither the teacher in his classroom or the priest at catechism will be able to get a word out of the sleepy little N-word, no matter how energetically they drum on his shorn skull." And explicitly on the page, which is the line, "You should see this little savage doesn't know any of the 10 commandments." And later, "N-words are all alike, I tell you. Vice is all the vices, believe you me. N-word smell, that's what makes the king grow. Remember the old saying, beat an N-word and you feed him." So he's like giving this discriminatory voice, or, like a character on the page, like containing it, right? He says, we see this voice later as well. When Césaire asks, "Look, am I humble enough? Have I enough calluses on my knees, muscles on my loins?" And the discriminatory voice answers, "Grovel in the mud, brace yourself in the thick of the mud, carry." Césaire takes the power out of these discriminatory voices by recycling them, modifying them, such as with the use of hyphens or fragments, which squeeze in how much space those voices take up, right? Placing these voices in a text where they are being policed and moderated, where they can only go so far, do so much. Then Césaire takes the sting out of these statements further. Sorry for the siren. I live near the hospital. Then Césaire takes the sting out of these statements further by affirming them. He writes, "I may well confess that we were at all times pretty mediocre dishwashers, shoeblacks without ambition, at best conscientious sorcerers, and the only unquestionable record that we broke was that of endurance under the chicote," which is a whip. By pretending to agree with the ideas projected onto him, by ironically affirming them and then taking them to their extreme, we see the emptiness of this discriminatory voice. What originally haunted and controlled Césaire's sense of identity now becomes a joke. He presses this further by writing, the master of laughter, the master of ominous silence, the master of hope and despair, the master of laziness, master of dance, it is I. So, right, he's kind of making fun of this voice, and that kind of gives him his power back. Sometimes Césaire breaks this affirmation and then returns to it in a way that makes the previous agreement unsettling, such as in the line, cheerfully obscene, completely nuts about jazz to cover their extreme boredom. I can boogie woogie, do the Lindy hop and tap dance. And for the special treat, the muting of our cries muffled by the wah, wah, wait. Everything is as it should be. By briefly acknowledging the violence behind these statements, by giving them a moment of silence, wait, and then returning to his affirmation of them, we see the full extent of what is behind the discriminatory voice that he pretends to agree with, the depth of the violence behind the phrase, everything is as it should be, as obviously it is not. In Lamar's Butterfly, there's also discriminatory authority present. We see this in You Ain't Gotta Lie, Mama Said, when Lamar is talking to someone from his hometown. This person asks him a series of questions, and Lamar eventually says, you sound like the feds, homie. This authority is close enough to be able to reference in conversation, to use as a metonym for something like, or an image for something like noisiness. We see this authority again in Mortal Man when Lamar writes, I hold grudges like bad judges don't let me resent you, and asks, if I'm tried in the court of law and the industry cut me off, if the government want me dead playing cocaine in my car, would you judge me as a drug head or see me as K. Lamar? So here he's referencing the same discriminatory authorities. Here, the authority is positioned as the antagonist, actively seeking to prevent those like Lamar from being successful. In hood politics, we see this discriminatory voice again, Lamar writing the LAPD, gambling, scrambling, the football numbers, slander. I'm not a rapper, so brace yourselves with this. N-words names on paper, you snitched all summer. And in King Kunta, oh yeah, F the judge, I made it past 25 and there I was. Here too, we see historically discriminatory authority as corrupt, and further as something to avoid if one is to continue living. So both artists sort of reference these authorities in their texts as something to avoid. In their article, Uncovering the Mystery Factories of African-American Suicide, Willis and others write that for the Black community, depression is less often expressed as sadness and idleness than as interpersonal violence. Here we see this phenomenon becoming a cycle. People are depressed because they've lost loved ones, which causes them to enact violence on others, and then more people are lost. We see the bitterness in Lamar, as we did in Césaire, when the authority figures who are supposedly there to help keep the community safe do not prevent the violence that's happening, often contributing to it instead. In The Blacker the Berry, a song that Lamar wrote in response to violence against Black bodies, specifically the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012, which is wild. That was like 13 years ago almost now. It's wild. We see him speak for the discriminatory voice that is embodied in the authorities around him, asking, you hate me, don't you? You hate my people. Your plan is to terminate my culture. In a less emotionally charged moment, the discriminatory presence is able to speak for itself. In Wesley's theory, a chorus sings, we should have never gave, inwards, money go back home, which seems to be a reiteration of the popular saying, go back to where you came from, or an expression of regret for allowing a Black person like Lamar to become rich, or even in a more literal sense, regret for stopping the use of free Black labor for the end of slavery. We see the ironic affirmation of the discriminatory voice in Butterfly when Lamar flaunts the racist ideas ascribed to Black people. He writes that once he becomes successful, he's going to take a few M16s to the hood, pass them out all out on the block, and have a swap meet by the White House. He writes that if anybody tries to stop this gathering of Black people, they'll be stalked out. We see this flaunting of ascribed Black violence on the album's cover as well, which is a group of Black men standing shirtless in front of the White House with cash in their hands and a dead judge at their feet. While this affirmation is perhaps less ironic than the other instances, it puts Lamar in a place of agency, changing the result of the discriminatory voice who says, Black people are violent or Black people are this, and from degradation, making you feel bad, to empowerment. In more ironical instances, Lamar writes, I want you to recognize that I'm a proud monkey, and part of my resonance came from the bottom of mankind. My hair is nappy, my D is big, my nose is round and wide. So he's saying, okay, you say these things about me. Well, I'm just going to say that they're true, but with an eye roll, right? That sarcasm sort of changes the punch of those statements and kind of makes it into a joke. Further, Lamar writes that he eats watermelon, chicken, and Kool-Aid on weekdays, and that he jumps high enough to get Michael Jordan endorsements. However, the last line of the song creates space for a moment of reflection, Lamar transitioning from more stereotypical indicators of Blackness to the fact that he wept when Trayvon Martin was killed, an indicator of Blackness that is grounded in the empathy and reality of many Black people. He turns this indicator into a question asking, why did I weep when Trayvon Martin was in the street, when gangbanging make me kill it and more Blacker than me? Excuse me. Oh, sorry, excuse me. That's from The Blacker the Berry. So by first including discriminatory voices and then ironically affirming them. Both Césaire and Lamar are able to create space to confront the tension between their lives and the death that surrounds them. They do this by confronting the discriminatory voices that are policing their existence and moderating them in a way that takes away their power. Okay. Whew. It's hard to read so long, but we're making it through. I hope you guys are doing okay on the other side of the screen. Okay, so once both writers have included a discriminatory voice and ironically affirmed it, they each have a moment of genuine confession. In Notebook, the speaker faces a Black man on the train. "You must know the extent of my cowardice," Césaire writes, "one evening on the streetcar facing me, an N-word." He writes, so this person had nothing and everything had left him, was leaving him. His nose, which looked like a drifting peninsula, and even his negritude was discolored as a result of untiring tawing. And the tar was poverty. Césaire describes the man as famished, as weary, as shameless, as stinking, and the whole thing added up to a hideous N-word, a grouchy N-word, a melancholy N-word, a slouched N-word, a comical and ugly N-word with some women behind me sneering at him. The speaker, whom we will call Césaire, confesses that he displayed a complicitous smile, his sneer a betrayal to the man who, though is unlike him, is also his peer through their shared identity as Black men. Césaire sneers at this man, even though when he describes him, he references Charles Baudelaire's poem, The Albatross, where an albatross who was once Prince of the Clouds is trapped by sailors and forced to drag his great wings about the deck. And so here's an illustration of that. Baudelaire is a French poet, or presumably, and you can see the, let me see if I can get my mouse going. See the bird caught, and you can also see the shadow of a person right in that bird, which is very interesting. And so, yeah. Though Césaire knows that this man is perhaps more than what he seems to be, that he perhaps was trapped, and that this is what made him comical and ugly, he still joins in mocking him, and this is his confession. In his interview with Raoul, Césaire discusses how he and some of his contemporaries, namely Georges Graciant and René Menil, had come to a certain conception of the intellectual. We did not have the right to lock ourselves up in our ivory towers. We knew that one had to commit oneself in one way or another. Perhaps it's the same idea that causes the speaker to feel ashamed of his decision to mock the famished, stinking Black man on the train. This moment of confession leads Césaire to an experience of shame. This occurs immediately after confessing his betrayal of the Black man on the train. He writes, "My heroism, what a farce, and my soul is lying down like this town in its refuse and mud. For my faith, I demand the vivid homage of spit." By humbling himself, examining his shame in a genuine way, as opposed to the ironic, eye-rolling affirmation of the shame described to him by the discriminatory voice, Césaire is able to examine how he actually feels. What was that? He writes, "I was hiding behind a stupid vanity destiny called me. I was hiding behind it, and suddenly there was a man on the ground, his feeble defenses scattered, his sacred maxims trampled underfoot, his pedantic rhetoric oozing air through each wound. There's a man on the ground, and his soul is almost naked, and destiny triumphs in watching the soul which defied in its metamorphosis in the ancestral." Oh, sorry. Gosh, I should not botch this. This is a great poem. "And destiny triumphs in watching the soul which defied its metamorphosis in the ancestral sloth." Who was he to think that he was not what the discriminatory voices said he was, that he could hide behind a stupid vanity? Instead, he becomes a man on the ground, vulnerable, destined by history to be humiliated. Césaire vows to be like the postilion of Havana, the slave on a plantation who welcomed new slaves and convinced them that they would be treated well, a role which he describes as a lyrical baboon pimp for the glamour of slavery. And yet he vows to be as enthusiastic as that postilion. He goes on, wallowing in the violence of Black history, those who explored neither seas nor sky, but who know in its most minute corners the land of suffering, those who have known voyages only through uprootings, until finally the shame breaks and Césaire asks, "But what strange pride suddenly illuminates me?" So by enduring the shame or what he feels as shame, right, he's able to get to the other side of it. Lamar goes through a similar process of confession and shame in Butterfly. He writes in How Much a Dollar Costs that though he was financially successful, when a Black man asked him for $1 at a gas station, he told him he didn't have it and shut his door. The man stared at him, Lamar writing, sorry, I'll talk about this Obama thing in a second. "He's staring at me in disbelief. My temper is building. He's staring at me. I grabbed my key. He's staring at me. I started the car. Then I tried to leave. And something told me to keep it in park until I could see the reason why he was mad at a stranger. Like I was supposed to save him. Like I'm the reason he's homeless and asking me for a favor." That is not a perfect imitation of the song, which is a very good song. So you should listen to it. Those are the lyrics. Eventually, Lamar begins to talk to the man, telling him angrily that he needed all the money he had, writing, "And I'm sensitive and I lack empathy." He looked at me and said, "Your potential is bittersweet." I looked at him and said, "Every nickel is mine to keep." He looked at me and said, "Know the truth, it'll set you free." Lamar continues to refuse to give him $1, and eventually the homeless man reveals that he is actually God in disguise. And Obama, for better or for worse, as a figure, said that Kendrick Lamar was How Much a Dollar Cost was his favorite song of 2015. It's wild. All of this is like 10 years ago now, which is so wild. I need to be, with the times in my analysis, but I love this album. I love the albums after it, albums before, but anyway, okay. Like a notebook, this causes Lamar to have a moment of shame. So this moment of like someone is asking him for help, someone whose identity he shares, and he's sort of like shame, turns them away and sort of is ashamed of them, and that kind of causes this sense of guilt or embarrassment or shame in himself. So, like a notebook, this causes Lamar to have a moment of shame. This takes place in a hotel room where Lamar is berated by Lucy, the voice of self-hatred and greed in the text, perhaps even the devil Lucifer himself. Lucy accuses Lamar, asking, "What can I blame you for?" And word I can name several: your little sister Bacon, a baby inside, just a teenager. Where was your patience? Where was your antennas? Where was the influence you speak of? You preached in front of 100,000 but never reached her. This song's also so good. Lucy says that Lamar is not a leader. Let's see, someone said, okay. If anybody can't hear, let me know. Okay, I'm seeing the chat. Good morning, everyone. I haven't been able to see this. Okay, yeah, but if there's an issue on my end, definitely let me know. Okay. Oh gosh, let's see. So, let me pull this back up. You guys still see this? Yeah. Okay.
No, we can't see it yet.
Okay.
Okay, and I have verification that I just put a reminder in the chat that people need to check their own mic and Realtek array settings if they can't hear, because the rest of us can. So
Okay,
you can just proceed
Okay.
with your engaging presentation, and I will handle the chat. You go right ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. So let's see. All right. We'll start the paragraph again. Let's see. Like a notebook, this causes Lamar to have a moment of shame. This takes place in a hotel room where Lamar is berated by Lucy, the voice of self-hatred and greed in the text, perhaps even the devil Lucifer himself. Lucy accuses Lamar, asking, "What can I blame him for?" And where I can name several: your little sister Bacon, a baby inside, just a teenager. Where was your patience? Where was your antennas? Where was the influence you speak of? You preach in front of 100.
Okay, excuse me, Miss Tharpe, I hate to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. Don't worry.
But people are saying that they can't see those incredible slides.
Okay. Yeah, let me see.
So, yeah, and they really want to see them. There's a lot of demand for it in in the chat.
Well,
So
I'm glad you guys want to see them. That's nice. Okay, let me see. All right.
there we go.
You can see it
There we
now?
go.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if there's anything else, let me know. It's good. Okay, I see the yes. The messages kind of pop up when they come, which is nice. Yeah, keep me
Awesome.
posted.
I'll manage that. You just go ahead with this engaging presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, here we go. Go to slideshow mode. All right. Okay, so let's see. She says, "You ain't no brother, you ain't no disciple, you ain't no friend." She asks, "A friend leave Compton for profit or leave his best friend? Little brother, you promised you'd watch him before they shot him. You FaceTime the one time that's unforgiven. You even FaceTime instead of a hospital visit because you thought he would recover well. The surgery couldn't stop the bleeding for real. Then he died, got himself, but said, you effing fail." Which, again, I am no Kendrick Lamar. Definitely listen to it. The song's amazing. But then again, we have, right, this moment of shame. So the inclusion of God, as well as Lamar naming the voice of his self-hatred, Lucy, in reference to the devil, highlights the tendency of Black Americans to turn to religion in times of depression, a behavior that was common even during slavery. Religion has been known as a protective factor against suicide. However, in their research, Leah Willis and others found that Black suicide victims were twice as likely as their white counterparts to have participated in religious activities at least once a month before they died. Further, in their article, "Suicide in African American Teenagers, Risk Factors and Coping Mechanisms," Marissa Spann and others found that the fatalism of putting one's fate entirely in the hands of a higher power was a risk factor for suicide. Franz Fanon critiques religious fatalism. And Franz Fanon is like this very weird experimental Black philosopher from the Caribbean. So he's like a Black French philosopher. And his work was really important to a lot of Black Panthers and people during the Black Power movement. But he has some hot takes. Okay, so Frantz Fanon critiques religious fatalism in Wretched of the Earth, writing, fatalism relieves the oppressor of all responsibilities, since the cause of wrongdoing, poverty, and the inevitable can be attributed to God. Césaire also critiques Black Christianity, describing a character in his play "Elle chante saison," which means rough French, bad French, and the dogs were silent, that's what it means, as both a good Christian and a good slave. I'm writing a notebook, those who have been lulled to sleep by so much kneeling, those whom they domesticated and Christianized, tom-toms of empty hands. However, like many other Black Americans, Lamar finds comfort in believing in a Christian God, as well as in positioning the voice of his own self-hatred as the antagonist of that God. I once heard God described as, God in general, the idea of God as good, organized direction, whatever that means to you, which is interesting. In his moment of shame, Lucy continues to berate Lamar, saying, "I know your secrets inward, mood swings is frequent inward, be everything is your fault." She says she knows that Lamar is depressed and that he attempted suicide. Both Césaire and Lamar have a moment of confession where they betray a Black man who seems powerless, but then is described supernaturally. Each text has a subsequent moment of shame where the speaker is confronted with the fact that they carry a more complicated insecurity than what the discriminatory voices have ascribed to them, a shame marked by their personal failures and the inheritance of the historical. So after including a discriminatory voice and ironically affirming that voice, and after a confession and a moment of shame, the long process we're going through here, we're getting near the end. About 10 more minutes. Césaire and Lamar are both able to accept their identity as Black men. However, before they are able to declare that, as Frantz Fanon wrote, it is good, fine, and good to be inward. Before they are able to continue to come to terms with the death that surrounds their position as Black people, they invoke another voice, the voice of the historical. So in his interview with Raoul, Césaire says, "I always place everything I do in the perspective of historical continuity. I have a deep awareness of the origin of the struggle, of the efforts and sufferings, of the huge hurdles that we Antillans have to overcome, and of the idea that this is my form of transcendence. History is basically a form of transcendence. All this will have to be taken up by others." So we see the voice of the historical in Notebook through how Césaire blurs his experience as a Black man with that of Toussaint Louverture, a leader of the Haitian Revolution. This is a painting of him, and I think it looks so contemporary, like someone could have painted it today, but it's from 1831, which is wild. I was trying to get the credit because I was like, oh, maybe someone just painted it, but it's very old. This is him. He's the leader of the Haitian Revolution. And Césaire of him writes, "What is mine, a lone man imprisoned in whiteness, a lone man defying the white screams of white death, Toussaint Louverture. And what is also mine, a little cell in Jura, where Louverture was imprisoned, a little cell, the snow lines it with white bars, the snow is a jailer mounting guard before a prison." So here we see again the presence of discriminatory authority, as even the snow is a jailer, as well as the voice of the historical through how Césaire claims that what happened to Louverture as mine, so he claims what happened to him as mine, blurring his own identity with that of the revolution leader. I love this painting. Should print that out. Okay. We see this voice again when he laughs at the Black man on the train. Perhaps part of Césaire's shame at laughing at this man is due to the voice of the historical, this blurring of self, which causes Césaire, by mocking another Black man, to also mock himself. Further, we see the voice of the historical when Césaire writes, I accept the hamstringing of my runaway audacity, the fleur-de-lis flowing from the red iron into the fat of my shoulder, and Monsieur Vautier Mancart's doghouse where I barked 6 brutal months." By substituting his body with those of the Black people who came before him, and those who were enslaved, he's saying, my shoulder, my runaway audacity, I barked 6 brutal months. By this ultimate act of empathy, Césaire is able to reach acceptance, a place that he has progressed toward as he went from including a discriminatory voice to mocking it, to confession, to shame. Finally, by embodying those moments of shame, by claiming the violence of slavery as if it was his own, by allowing the voice of the historical to speak, by blurring his Black body with those who came before, Césaire is able to achieve a state of acceptance. We see Césaire finally accept Black history and his famous contribution to what will later be known as the Negritude movement, sort of like a Black power movement in France and the Caribbean. He writes, "My negritude is not a stone, its deafness hurled against the clamor of the day. My negritude is not a glaucoma of dead liquid over the earth's dead eye. It takes root in the red flesh of the soil. It takes root in the ardent flesh of the sky. It breaks through opaque prostration with its upright patience." And what could arguably be translated in English as inwardtude, negritude, is what it's called in French. Césaire's ironic affirmation of the discriminatory voice, his pressing past its own shame and his attunement to the historical, allows him to see something beautiful in what has been labeled by discriminatory ideology as dead. Césaire writes, for those who never invented anything, for those who never explored anything, for those who never conquered anything, and later, I accept totally without reservation my race that no applusion of hyssop mixed with lilies could purify, my race pitted with blemishes, my race ripe grapes for drunken feet, my queen of spittle and leprosy, my queen of whips and scrofula, I accept, and the flogged inward saying, forgive me, master, and the 29 legal blows of the whip, and the hamstringing of my runaway audacity, and the yaws, the mastiff, the suicide, the promiscuity, and the Negro every day more abased, more cowardly, more sterile, less profound, more spilled out of himself, more separated from himself, more wily with himself, less immediate to himself. I accept it all. And so he kind of gets to this place of like, for better or for worse, what we've been through is part of who we are, you know. And Tupac, and here is Tupac. It's kind of an abrupt transition. Okay. Going through the process of racial reckoning that he does, let's see, one second. And particularly, sorry, I'm blocking myself a little bit. Okay, going through the process of racial reckoning that he does, and particularly his decision to ironically affirm the discriminatory voice instead of ignoring it, allows Césaire to redefine the meaning of what it means to be an N-word. He later describes negritude as the awareness of being Black, the simple acknowledgement of a fact which implies the acceptance of it, a taking charge of one's destiny as a Black man, one's history and culture. We see the voice of the historical in Lamar's Butterfly in his fictional interview with the rapper Tupac Shakur. To Pimp a Butterfly was initially titled, which was cool to find out, To Pimp a Caterpillar. Maybe some of you guys knew that. You could say so in the chat. So that the acronym would be Tupac. So he changed it to Pimp a Butterfly, but it was To Pimp a Caterpillar. Lamar considers Tupac a major influence in his work, and in the last song for the album, Mortal Man, he writes Tupac a poem and then proceeds to interview him. So in this fictional interview, which prophesizes that there would be a race war if the oppression of Black people continues, he says, I think the N-words is tired of grabbing ish out the stores. The next time it's a riot, there's going to be like a bloodshed for real. I don't think America know that. It's going to be murder. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be like Nat Turner, 1831, up in this mother effer. And it's funny, 1831. So we'll talk about Nat Turner in a second, but that's the same year that this was painted. And it looks so contemporary. So this sort of like blurring of time and people is really interesting to me. So let's see. Okay. Well, Lamar responds to this by saying that music is Black people's only hope, and that sometimes when he's rapping, it feels like the words are coming from somewhere outside of himself. Tupac says, we ain't even really rapping, we're just letting our dead homies tell stories for us. So we see the voice of the historical here through how Lamar blurs himself with Tupac, writing both his thoughts and those of Tupac in this interview. We also see it in how Tupac references Nat Turner, leader of a 19th century slave revolt, which discusses the actions of Black people in the contemporary when discussing the actions of Black people in the contemporary. So he's like referencing something that's hundreds of years old as like relevant to him, right? Here, what has come before extends to now through the similar oppression of Black people and the similar possibility of rebellion. Just as Césaire claims Louverture's fate as mine, so Tupac and subsequently Lamar claims Nat Turner's. In addition, we see the voice of the historical through how Lamar and Tupac blur themselves with other Black people who have been murdered, saying that when they rap, it is the dead homies who are speaking. In the Mortal Man interview, Lamar reads another poem, this one comparing working class Black people to a caterpillar whose only job is to eat or consume everything around it in order to protect itself from this mad city. Reference to earlier album. He writes that while consuming its environment to survive, the caterpillar notices how much the world shuns him, but praises the butterfly. He explains that the butterfly represents talent, the thoughtfulness, and the beauty within the caterpillar, but how the caterpillar sees the butterfly as weak and figures out a way to pimp it. However, when the caterpillar itself becomes a butterfly, he breaks the cycle and is finally free. Lamar closes by saying, although the butterfly and the caterpillar are different, completely different, they are one and the same. After reading this poem, which he says describes his world, he asks Tupac, what's your perspective on that? This section of the album, his closing song, is interesting in how it illuminates the blurring of the Black body. Though Lamar is writing both his questions and Tupac's responses, there's a sense of distinction between them, even as they share the same mind. Tupac is able to help Lamar see his individual experience as part of a collective, in a similar way to how Césaire is able to accept Black history after placing himself in the position of those who were enslaved. When Tupac does not answer Lamar's final question, what's your perspective on that? Lamar loses the voice of the historical. He panics, calling Tupac's name over and over, Pac, 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 which is how the album ends. Lamar is able to accept what it means to be Black once he has acknowledged the historical. In the song All Right, which would later become the unofficial anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement, Lamar writes, when you know we've been hurt, been down. Hold on, sorry, I'm black. Okay. When you know we've been hurt, been down before, when our pride was low, looking at the world like, where do we go? And we hate Popo when it kills dead in the street for show. I'm at the preacher's store, my knees getting weak and my gun might blow, but we gonna be all right. Obviously, again, the song much better than me just reading these lyrics. Like in Césaire's acceptance of the violence of Black history, Lamar is able to acknowledge the loss that Black people have experienced, both in the contemporary and the historical. However, despite the struggle for safety, for dignity, Lamar asserts hope, stating we can be all right. And this culminating moment of acceptance is perhaps foreshadowed at the beginning of the album by the sample from Boris Gardner's 1974 song, Every N-Word is a Star. In his article, If God Got Us, Kendrick Lamar, Paul Tillich, and the advent of existentialist hip hop, James B. McLeod Jr. writes, this repeating statement on the first track is a response to the devaluing of Black lives in a culture in which your life is thought to be worth less than those who are designated as white, bravely declaring oneself to be a star denotes not just presence, but courage. And with courage comes the ability to determine worth of self. By beginning this way, the album feels as if it has come full circle by the time the listener reaches all right. And so here's, maybe it's from a soundtrack. If anyone wants to speak to this song, we can, but we see sort of like, you take these ideas or these tropes and you sort of make them your own in a way that kind of takes away the sting of what other people say. Okay, we're almost done, maybe like 4 more minutes. Okay, we also see this acceptance of Black identity in the penultimate song, I, where along with the chorus of I love myself, Lamar reconstructs the N-word. He writes, instead of N-word, which has been used as a pejorative, Black people should say niggas. And his article, Loving You is Complicated, Black Self-Love and Affirmation in the Rap Music of Kendrick Lamar, Darius D. Hills writes, Nika says Lamar is an African pronouncement of royalty and generally a positive affirmation of Black selfhood and peoplehood that flies in the face of dehumanizing connotations of N-word, for hard R or A, I guess. Further, Hills writes, in Lamar's view, NEGUS connects the Black past and Black present in more wholesome, humane ways. And this is similar to what Césaire does in Notebook with his reconstruction of the French word neg, which means both the N-word and Black person in French, to negritude, taking the epithet and making it into something more celebratory, something to be proud of. Like in Notebook, Lamar affirms his Blackness, writing, I'm African American and Black as the name of Tyrone and Darius. There is both an admittance and acceptance of the pain Black people have endured and an assertion of his identity within that Black culture and history. By going through this process of racial reckoning, which involves an inclusion of a discriminatory voice and an ironic affirmation of that voice, a genuine confession and a subsequent moment of shame, and finally an acknowledgement of the historical, which blurs their Black bodies with those who came before, Césaire and Lamar are able to internalize and accept their identity as Black men. According to this last two, we're almost done. Thank you for bearing with me. And also, it's a lot to read. Okay. According to Ronnie Sharfman, at least in 2008, Césaire was hardly a household name in France. He'd been to America only once, and if it were not for the translation of his work by Clayton Eshelman and Annette Smith, he would most likely not be known in the English world at all. His notebook of a return to the native land was initially published in an obscure Parisian journal, and unlike Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, it was not immediately successful or popular. However, like Lamar's album, it did mean something to the people it was for, and toward the African Revolution, Frantz Fanon writes, before Césaire, West Indian literature was a literature of Europeans. The West Indian identified himself with the white man, adopted a white man's attitude, was a white man. Further, he writes, for the first time, a lycée teacher, which is like a high school teacher, a man, therefore, who was apparently worthy of respect, was seen to announce quite simply to West Indian society that it is good and fine to be a Negro. Sharman adds to this sentiment, writing, it is impossible to measure the impact this long poem has on Caribbean culture, on French letters, on decolonialization, on movements across Africa, on the affirmation of Black identity in the Francophone world and beyond. Nothing like it had ever come out of the Antilles. While Lamar's work is nationally recognized and Césaire's was initially unknown, while Lamar has toured across the world for his work and Césaire has only gone to America once, both men tapped into something meaningful for their communities and both in response to this prevalence of death and what it means to return to it. Both Notebook and Butterfly are experimental in a number of ways, and they therefore do not necessarily present linear narratives. However, both of these texts go through a similar process of racial reckoning, which involves inclusion and then ironic affirmation of discriminatory voice, a genuine confession and a subsequent moment of shame, and acknowledgement of the historical, whose blurring of Black bodies allows these writers to ultimately accept their identities as Black men. Though these steps might not be presented linearly in the text, I would argue that this process is dialectical, each step allowing access to the next. I would also argue that though Lamar's celebration of Blackness is similar to Césaire's, his acceptance does not come directly from the notion of negritude, just as Césaire's negritude was not directly influenced by the Harlem Renaissance. Perhaps this too is evidence of the voice of the historical, which, just as it has blurred the bodies of these men when those who came before them, seems to have blurred Césaire and Lamar with each other as well. So here they are, and that is the end of that. And these are my sources. Lots of sources. Thank you so much. And here's the QR code in case anybody wants to scan that. Okay.
And Angela, if you could leave the QR code
Yeah.
up, and I have also provided directions for our attendees to post their questions in the chat so that we can get them addressed. And I know they're populating them. I'm quite sure. Deandra, make sure you get, go ahead and use this QR code. I had a couple of our amazing students who are very engaged in the chat.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. That's great.
Yes. And so I know that the questions will come.
Perfect.
And you all please see the contact information, the email for our Scholar of the Hour. And I will actually, as the questions are being populated, I will actually kick it off with one question.
Great.
That I have. Of course, I had a ton of them. And I am really excited about your choice of the comparison with Césaire and Kendrick Lamar, also known as K. Dot, one of my absolute favorites. He is number 3 on my list.
Oh, who's your number 1?
You know what? Tupac is my number 1.
Yeah.
If I come back, I want to come back as a Phoenix Shakur. I am absolutely enamored with the work that she did as an advocate and all of those things, and Tupac's life as a poet and a dancer, and that those are the pieces that people don't know about him, that he was a Renaissance man. We have one. I'm going to pause my question. Ulysses says, I don't have a question currently, but thank you, Miss Angela Tharpe.
Thank you so much.
For this very insightful comparison. Oh, you need to script. Yes, Ulysses. Yes. Tupac is my number 1. And oddly enough, Nas is my number 2.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another
We
day.
love
People
Nas.
don't know the roots to African American music and jazz that his father had as an activist. So yeah, I'm a nerd when it comes to that thing. Okay, Austin has a question.
Yeah.
I will defer my questions for you, Ms. Tharpe, because we're going to get
to I'm excited to hear it though. Yeah.
Since you extensively wrote about Kendrick, what other hip hop artists or albums do you find inspirational, either for yourself or the wider history of Black culture? All right, Austin, come through with these good questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. Let's see. I think, what came to mind, maybe not explicitly hip hop to start, but it's always, whenever anybody asks me my favorites, I'm always like, oh God, what is music? What is anything? I would say, the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I know that's not like explicitly hip hop, but I think that is very important as, a reflection. I think I am drawn toward works, music, books, poems, etc., that sort of are able to explore their own life in a way that is not like, I think so often as people and even as creatives, especially in the age of social media, there's like, we're just sort of like in the shapes that people give us. Like, we're like, oh, love is good. Here's a love story, thing like, okay, J. Cole is another person who tells stories, right? And that way, I think like being specific in how your life is reflected in your mind and in your memory, and doing that in a way that's both relatable to other people and also true to you is really important. I think Lauryn Hill does that. J. Cole obviously does that. I like Tierra Whack, like people who are kind of weird, and who are both in the tradition of hip hop and also like sort of creating their own world in their like I heard that. Sorry, this is all over the place. I'm bad at lists. But I heard that someone say that like as artists, you shouldn't be so worried about recognition and you should be more interested in reflecting your own world to other people, like your own imagination, your own perception. And as creatives, that world is often strange and off kilter and unique to you, and at the same time universal and relatable to other people. And so I think I especially appreciate artists who do that, who tell stories, and who build in that way. So maybe J. Cole, Tierra Whack are two of those. Lauryn Hill. I liked Drake doesn't necessarily do this, and now he's so problematic. But he was a big one for me before. Kanye also very problematic, very very explicitly problematic now. But when I was a kid, his stuff was important to me. My mom loved College Dropout, and I listened to that when I was like 8 or 9. Even though now obviously it's complicated, and so I think I appreciate hip hop artists who are both relatable and also are expressing. I mean, Kendrick in this album too, like expressing things in their own way that feel specific in that way. And I would love to hear what hip hop albums you like. We can put that in the chat as well.
Most definitely. We actually have another question, so I'm going to defer my question again. This is from, all right, Dr. Matthews.
Oh, great. Hi.
Dr. Matthews. Yes, it is. She said, I'm interested in the positive power of shame that comes through from both Césaire and Lamar, especially at a time when political conservatives want to avoid shame altogether. Do you know of other songs from Lamar that explore this approach?
Yeah. I think that's great. I think there's a couple things. Like I think about how in Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, there's the song We Cry Together. There's a couple songs like Anti-Diaries and us also We Cry Together. We Cry Together, it's like a skit, right? So it's like him and Taylor Page, who was great in Zola. And they're just kind of having a fight, basically, right? But then there's also the sound of tap dancing, and they say stop tap dancing around the problem, right? And there's like this shame, maybe, and this person that you're supposed to love the most, your partner, in the skit, obviously, and in real life with other people. You're supposed to love them the most. You're not supposed to have these arguments. You're not supposed to be making fun of each other and saying I should have been with your cousin, all this like really mean stuff they're saying to each other. And it sort of transitions from this like sort of at each other's throats. It's also sort of in reference and homage to Baby Boy, which is a movie I love. But there's both this fighting and then this coming together at the end, kind of, and I think in that song and in that album, and songs like Anti-Diaries, where he's talking about family members who have transitioned genders and like, how him and other people used to talk about that and how he's sort of grown in that approach. I think that shame and guilt, and I mean, even just going back to reflection, right? Allows you to sit with what you're thinking for a second. And then because ideally, maybe we all secretly want to be the best version of ourselves we can be. We think about, if I don't want to feel like this, I don't want to be this kind of person. Like, how can I be different, and how can I be better? And then from that place of shame that then becomes reflection, and that then becomes like, okay, I'm going to do better, or let's stop fighting, or like, I treated my family members like this, and now I want to treat them like this, like that moment of shame leads us to pause. And I think that pausing allows us to reassess who we are and who we want to be. And I think in that sense, it's helpful. I think remaining in shame or remaining in guilt or remaining in this moment without changing or without taking a second to wonder why isn't productive, because it kind of keeps you like afraid to make mistakes or afraid to be whatever version of yourself you are, but I think if we're able to take that shame as a prompt to reflect on like, okay, who do we want to be? Then there's a lot more space to grow as people and to become people who can accept the mistakes we've made and also be better in the future. Yeah.
Thank you for that very thoughtful response. We have two more questions in the chat. I may just have to email you my questions afterwards because they're lighting this chat up. And we have
Awesome.
another 6 minutes. Okay. So
Okay.
Naja Miller asks, do you see Kendrick Lamar as being controversial these days, or does his music still have a strong meaning as it did in the past?
That is a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. I think about that a lot, so I love that. Okay, so Tip and Butterfly is from 2015. That's when I was in college. So like I like Kendrick Lamar too as a figure because like, you know, people who are in college now, maybe some of you guys, right? And people who were in college 20 years, like he's been around. And I think I mean, maybe not, he wasn't so around 20 years ago, but anyway, like when I was in college, we had To Pimp a Butterfly, we had Good Kid, Mad City, we had Damn, which is also an album that that was like when I was leaving school and I had a lot of feelings and it was a very much feeling centric concept album. Um, and then, you know, these days we have GNX. Very recently, we have The Beef. We have Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I think when people tell me that like he is less political than he was, I do think I resist that because I think in my head, this era is like most prevalent because that's when I was like younger and, you know, more emotional and latching on to music more than I do now. But I do think he is sort of like transitioning away from those things. Maybe he will come back. I think the beef and then GNX sort of created like a, a different a different vibe, I guess. But I still think it's interesting. I think that the beat, like Euphoria, I think was my favorite song of the beef. I know we love Not Like Us as well. But I don't know. I think I would say that maybe currently he is in a different place than he was when he was writing these things 10 years ago. Maybe artists are allowed to do that. I think as celebrities, we sort of like hold people to like the standard that is maybe not as human as we hold each other. And I think as long as people are not in power with whatever beliefs or whatever things they're moving in, it's okay maybe to like take what they're saying, their art, as like expressions of where they were in the moment and understanding that that moment might change even from who they are today. So I still think he's influential. I think that the earlier stuff is a little bit more explicitly political than the new stuff. But it's okay. You know, maybe as an artist, we should give him space to be both. And if he comes back to stuff like this, concept albums, we'll love it. And if he wants to kind of move in a different direction, you know, we can love that too.
Thank you. And we also have another question. Katie Fabian said, I
Right?
also enjoyed how topical this was with the recent exposure Kendrick has had with the new demographic.
Oh,
Did you watch the halftime show? I thought it was interesting after seeing Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam. What
yeah.
were your thoughts on the symbolism and the themes present in the show?
Nice. I love these questions. This is great. Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. Yeah, I I liked the halftime show. I mean, I don't know. I wonder what the new demographic is. A new demographic, sort of like America at large versus specifically the Black community. I'd be
I'm
interested.
going to assume that that was the intent.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah.
say that people who had never attended this ethereal cookout that we keep having,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
They got a chance to peek over the fence and
Yeah.
see what the ethereal cookout was, and
Yeah.
this is what I'm taking from this
Yeah.
this
Okay. Me
question.
too. Me too. Me
So
too.
yeah.
Very good question. Yeah. Yes. I liked I liked the halftime show. I know some people didn't. I liked the, like, you know, the red, white, and blue. He said like maybe he said the revolution will be televised now or something, some paraphrase of, you know, that's a paraphrase of what he was saying. Um I think that though he only rapped from GNX from my experience or from my memory, which is not very good. Um and maybe if he would have done some of the older songs, it would have meant something more explicitly political. I do think that like the people who he brought on stage with him and the background dancers, the colors, like the stoop dance, you know, on the light and all of that, like I think that is also like representation in itself is political to me. And I think choosing who's going to be there with you when you do it and who you're doing it for, even if it's not, you're not singing all right, or you're not singing these songs that have mattered to people and are explicitly political. Like, I think showing up with the people that you want to support is political too. So I think, yeah. And then, yeah, Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam, that was, I thought it was great. I don't know. I'm not into all of the niche of who's in and who's out, but I would say I liked it. And I think there's other ways to be political, even if you don't do the old songs, though I would have loved some of the old songs maybe as well.
Thank you. And you have all of these amazing comments in the chat thanking you for your presentation, how much they enjoyed it.
Yay.
David Siv asked, what is your favorite song out of all of Kendrick's albums?
That's very hard. That's very, I mean, okay, I'll say real quick, I know I gotta go. I have multiple and I like them for different reasons. I would say, I mean, it's going to be a basic answer. Oh my gosh. Whoever you are, find me. We could talk more about this. But I do think that, like, when I was in college, All Right was a really important song to the people around me. I was in college from 2012 to 2017. So, a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening then. And I think that song brought people together and gave people like language that we wouldn't have had in the same way. Otherwise, it kind of held a lot of us together. And in that sense, I think that that's a really important song to me. I also love all of the like skit songs. Like I loved How Much It All. I know Obama says his favorite, so I don't really want to be like me too, but I love that skit and that song. I love You as sort of like this like reflection of like what does it mean. Those are all from To Pimp a Butterfly. I love Anti-Diaries, and I love we cry together. I love Not Like, I don't know. I love a lot. We could talk about it more. I don't know if I could pick a favorite, but I do think All Right was important to me when I was in college, and I think it kind of made a lot of us feel more seen and protected and sort of like affirmed in how we were feeling.
Thank you. And of course, more accolades for a very we got one more question that just popped up, and we are at the 11:02. So what I'm going to do is stop recording because I have to be cognizant and respectful of the rest of the schedule, but
yeah.
I will stay on. Let me stop the recording.
Cool.